Hi friends, welcome back to Industrious Bee. I am Melissa, and today I have been inspired to speak with you, my friends, about the beautiful topic of bottoms. And I'm not talking about your behind, not that kind of bottom. Bottoms, rock bottom. Those beautiful, dark, dingy, horrible places that we find ourselves. And the gift that's given to us human beings if we are blessed enough and aware enough to recognize them as gifts. And as I was meditating and vibing into how I'm going to begin to tell this story of the gifts that have been given to me, there's so many places in my life, and there's so many highlighted places and low-lighted places that it's hard for me to know where to begin. And Spirit guided me and told me today that I will begin at my first recognizable bottom that I had in this existence. And for me, that was April 19th, 2008. April 19th, 2008 was the first day that I hit a rock bottom when it came to my addiction. And to paint the picture for you, I was 27 years old. I had a 1-year-old daughter. I had been working at a restaurant as a bartender for many years, and I still had my apartment. I had multiple people living in my apartment that were in a similar situation as I was. Many of them were homeless, and my floor was the only place for them to crash. It was the last place for them to go. I had a relationship that was 100% based on his willingness to supply me with what I needed. Had nothing to do with love, I knew nothing of love at this point. And I had become the mother that I swore I never would be. My daughter was 1 year old, and she was at this age where she had just started walking, and I could no longer just leave her in a playpen or leave her in her crib because she had learned how to crawl out. And prior to this day, multiple times in my past, I had tried to kick the habit of narcotics. I was hopelessly addicted to mainly Norco was my drug of choice, but really any painkiller that I could get myself on. And if that was not available, if it was really any other pill that I could ingest. And I had tried to kick this for a long time. And anyone who's gone through the withdrawal of narcotics, it's terrible. Within hours of you taking your last pill, you start to get muscle cramps, sweats, shivers, and just everything smells awful, everything tastes awful. Within a couple more hours, you're literally, zero energy, the worst headache you've ever had, the worst stomach ache, diarrhea, vomiting. And as the time increases, the worse and worse it gets. So I had gone through this process many times, or attempted it, and sometimes successfully, where I would be off of the medication for weeks, sometimes months, and I would get back on it. And so this particular day was really no different than any other day. I woke up. By the time I would wake up, I was already in withdrawal, because when I passed out at night, I'd be asleep long enough that my body would end up being in withdrawal by the time I came to. And I didn't wake up, I came to, and I would just groggily, move around and just like, oh, my body would hurt. And I was already smelling that awful smell and tasting that awful taste. And this day, just like many other days, my daughter was lying in her crib just crying for her mom. And I couldn't get out of bed. That was very usual for me. I had to reach over to my side dresser and, pop 5 Norcos at the time just to, sit there and allow for it to start to work. And once I would feel unsick enough, I would, get her out of her crib, place her on the floor, and try to drink enough coffee to become coherent. And then it was usually followed by 5 more Norcos. And then I might be in a space where I could communicate with my child. So this happened this day, and I had a bunch of people living in my apartment, like I said, and they, weren't taking out the trash. They weren't cleaning up after themselves. This place was a disaster. It was disgusting. We were all addicts. We were all zero motivation to do anything. And this particular day, they had done just like they usually did, left everything strewn all over my apartment. I go and put my daughter in the high chair to give her something to eat, and I look in the refrigerator and we don't have food. And we don't have food because I have chosen to spend all of my money on this pill. So she's crying, she's hungry. I reach in the refrigerator and I pull out this little container of olives that I had gotten from Taco Bell. I had a pack of saltine crackers. And there was one other little thing, and I don't remember, but it was a little packet of something from a restaurant. And I put that on her high chair, and that's what she ate that day. And as she finished her horrible meal, she starts to cry for me, and I have no life in me to pick my child up. I'm literally terrified of her. I don't know how to be with her. I'm mentally, physically, spiritually exhausted, which I didn't even know what that meant at that time, but that was like the state that I survived in every day. And I was terrified of my child. And she cried and she cried and she cried, and she wanted her mother, but her mother didn't exist. There was no mother in there. And I had hit every single marker of like what I would never do. I had stolen from my family. I had stolen from my work. I had stolen because having a pill addiction is extremely expensive. We're talking a $200-$300 a day habit, where I was at that point. I was ingesting anywhere between 20 and 40 Norcos in a day. And I was just, one of those people that had to hold up this image that I was doing okay. And I had spent so much time just holding up this facade of my life and what was, hidden behind the walls of my home. And I had put on this happy face, and I had just reached into every place that I had anything extra, and I was completely and utterly exhausted by that day. 100% tired of withdrawing, tired of every moment, like, where am I going to get my next pill? Where am I going to do this? Tired of watching my child want a mother who couldn't be there unless she was on 15 Norcos. I was exhausted. I remember crying and just praying that day, like, please let me go to prison or something where they can lock me up and I can't access anything, because I don't know why I can't quit. And one of the huge misconceptions about addiction is that, as parents, we should be able to love our children enough to, and that is just such a ignorant statement, because as a woman who's experienced this, I loved my child beyond anything that I could have ever ever loved in my entire life, but I did not love myself. Plain and simple. It does not matter how much you care about anything else in the world. If you don't love yourself and you have a bunch of unhealed, unresolved traumas, addiction is a huge possibility. And one of the most obvious ways for somebody to survive with that much trauma. So I prayed that day. I prayed. And one of the prayers that I was terrified of saying was just like, help me. You know, I was always bargaining with God. If you do this, I'll do this. If you give me this, I'll do this. If this goes this way, I'll do this way. With all of my last ditch efforts, I would offer up what I thought I had to bargain with this power greater than myself. And this day, thank God, this day I had nothing. Nothing. It still brings me to tears. I had nothing to offer my God. And I just said, please help me. That's all I can ask for. And in that moment, one of my favorite quotes is, the usefulness of a cup is its emptiness. And the emptiness that I felt that day and the space that I was in was what was absolutely necessary for, you know, a spirit greater than myself to enter me and create a situation. A divine intervention is what it is, because it came from no thing that I had. There was no thing in me at all, and there had to be no thing in me, and it came from a place of complete and absolute surrender. And this was the day that surrender started to rewrite its definition to me. It used to have such a negative connotation, and it just looks and sounds so hopeless and helpless. But surrender is really just like, you know, letting go of the whatever, of the everything. Let it go. Letting go of the control that we feel like we have, and letting yourself surrender to the truth and whatever that is for you. And all of our stories are different. And that day I was able to let go, and I just heard, you know, call so-and-so, and I called so-and-so. And that day was actually that day I had to go to work. So I continued to use throughout that day, and April 20th, the next day, 2008, was the first day that I found recovery. And it came from a bottom. That was my first experience of like understanding what it means to have this like rock bottom place. And only if you've been there, and I know many people have, only if you've been there can you understand the way that that can become the most important and valuable part of your existence. Since then, I've had a million bottoms. Of course, there were multiple places in my life that I felt like I had some kind of control. And that, you know, that doesn't sit very easy for a lot of people, because we do have agency over our life. We have agency, and we have choices that we get to make. And that is part of our human existence. When I mean control, I'm talking about the things that we are trying to manipulate and alter because we feel like we know what the outcome is going to be or has to be. You know, this idea that things are supposed to look, feel, and be this way, otherwise I'm just going to cling to it and I'm going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting. That's what I'm talking about. And that day I realized that the way that I had been operating my life was not a possible way to sustain life anymore. And I began the road to recovery. And at the time, I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea. Thank God I had no idea. But what I had been afflicted with was this gaping hole that had been left in me after years and years of trauma and years of not loving myself. I didn't know what that meant. I mean, it took me a long time to figure out that loving myself has so much more to do with having difficult conversations and setting up boundaries that are very uncomfortable, and saying no to things and sitting with my intuition before I make a decision, and giving myself grace and forgiveness. As an addict, and even as a recovering addict, I put myself in many horrible positions, and I did things that I was very unproud of, and I carried a lot of shame. And as I started to address these areas and get to know these areas, I was able to find, grace for myself and forgiveness, and that is hard work. Loving yourself isn't just, wrapping your hands around yourself and sitting in a warm bath and sipping tea. I mean, that can be it. I do that. But it has to do with going to these places and addressing something that had happened to you, or something that was taken away from you, and being there and loving that little child that should have had something different, and really allowing yourself to go to these places that don't feel fun. That's loving. That's getting to know yourself. And the beautiful part about these bottoms that we're put in, and this ability to release the idea of what it's supposed to look like, fuse ourselves with this spirit, or God, or power greater than ourselves, or however you want to say it. So fusing ourselves with that and allowing ourselves to be connected to the flow of this, and then getting to know ourselves and recognizing those areas that need attention. And one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard is, can you replace the word attention with the word connection? And there are parts in ourselves that want attention. They want connection. They want connection with something higher. They want to be validated, recognized, and so they can be set free. And it's easier said than done, but this process began for me with the moment that I was at my very bottom. And I couldn't have told you that day, but I'll tell you many 15 years later that was one of my favorite starting points in my life. One of the best things that ever happened to me was that worst day of my life. And I am forever grateful for that day, and I'm forever grateful for what led up to it and what came afterwards. And so today, my message is learning to love those really difficult places, even if it doesn't have to feel good. That's such a misconception. It's not going to feel good. I'm petting my kitty. It's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel good. But can you love and appreciate and respect and be with those places? Thank you for listening. Thank you for spending your time coming to my channel and being with me. And I'll see you on the next video. My kitty wants to come say hi really quick. Bye.